And the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Hello and welcome to the only independent news and opinion program where we chronicle two distinct possibilities. Either the demise and possible extinction of the Homo sapien or the greatest leap forward in human history. One thing is certain, there is no status quo. Welcome, this is the Daily Australian Radio Show, episode number 66 for Monday, April the 7th, 2025. My name, Jason Olborn. That's the guy that gets belted around but no one sees why. And here I'm joined by my partner in news, the one that you all see and know and love. Her name, Nicola Charles.
What do you mean you get belted around? Good morning, everyone. What do you mean by that, Jason?
Oh, look, I just find it funny that I put together, various different things. And look, on YouTube, I made the point the other day, there was somebody on X and he had quite a large following, well over 100,000. And he was complaining about how he was booted off YouTube for no reason. And I said something along the lines of, welcome to my world. I can share a video doing an analysis of Joe Rogan and Donald Trump, specifically discussing extraterrestrials, which I played a short clip, which you're allowed to do. And I got 10 views before YouTube took it down, saying that I was sharing dangerous material. And the original source material had 30 million views at that time. And I just thought, it's just so ridiculous.
No, other people are allowed to talk about stuff, but we're not. See, Tucker Carlson could talk about aliens all day long, and he even used to on Fox News. And it's this control of who is the media and who can speak. And that's why we have to fight to be heard. I actually woke up this morning and I feel a bit weird because we had the clocks change here in certain states in Australia on Saturday night. And I did feel like I got that extra hour. Like I got a lot done yesterday. I had a day off and it was pretty great, but I still feel a bit weird and fuzzy. But when I opened my phone today, there is an amazing report from also a group of people, women actually, bit sexist in the modern world, who get constantly shadow banned, and they're called Chicks on the Right. I'm sure you've heard of them, Jason. So they've done this amazing report on Eric Swalwell, who was on the House Intel Committee, eventually got booted off. He had a 2-year-long, he's married, but he had a 2-year-long sexual affair with a Chinese spy, well-known Chinese spy called Fang Fang. And this was during, I think it was the Biden administration or just prior to the Biden administration. Nothing happened to this guy. He stayed on the House Intel Committee, which is such important intelligence information that they have to go to a room, put all of their phones in a security box, then go in an elevator 6 floors underground and walk into a room with no technology to have these meetings. And here he was having an affair with a Chinese spy. Anyway, he got drunk at the weekend in a restaurant. Chicks on the Right, some American pundit just happened to be at the next table. Eric Swalwell, still a Democrat, got drunk. He was there with lobbyists. While he was drunk, he was asking their advice on how to cheat on his wife. He was talking about various ethnic groups that he prefers having sex with. And he also said that on the Capitol, they have orgies, Jason. The guys recorded him for 90 minutes on his phone. Then he chased him down, followed him to his car where he had a driver, which, taxpayer dollars pay for. The guy was absolutely plastered. And he said, how come you can say that Elon Musk is a threat to national security and you're drunk in this restaurant talking about all this stuff? Of course, he didn't answer. but apparently he's giving it to Chuck Grassley, I believe. He's giving it to someone over there because this guy, we always knew after Fang Fang, this guy was a massive danger. But isn't it incredible? You know, this is national security stuff. And these people, if they're sort of, you know, a sex pest or a rat bag, as he seems to be, that they just go out and get drunk and spill their guts. Now, the problem with this is that's like China's wet dream, isn't it? Right? When you've got an American who has access and power like that, and you can get them drunk and they spill their guts, what a nightmare, Jason.
Oh, look, it's extraordinary. I have seen that article and that film clip. It is just extraordinary. And when Swalwell gets chased down by the journo, he goes into a bit of a tailspin and a bit of a panic, and you can see that he's being caught out. But what kind of politician sits in a room and big notes himself and is this two-timing cunning bastard and thinks that it's perfectly okay? And the reason that he thinks it's perfectly okay is because that's the behaviour on the Hill. Now, this is not something that's isolated. So when you think of absolute power and you think of these relationships of politicians perhaps and their staffers and other particular scenarios, and we can think back to Tara Reid and her allegations against Joe Biden for rape that were quite serious. And of course, because it was Joe Biden, it was pushed away, and Tara Reid ended up having to move to Russia. She became a commentator on TNT radio for some time as well. So this constant behaviour, it very much plays out like what you would expect high school behaviour,
Totally. Yeah.
or that this privileged private school, boarding schooly type of, you know, stuff.
Or
that
Freemasony. It feels Freemasony, right? There's no rules for them.
And it's funny, you know, you would mention that because that's exactly what that whole Freemasonry behaviour seems. It seems like the adult version of this privileged high school behaviour that just is allowed to
Debauched.
flourish.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, it only came up yesterday that in a conversation I had with somebody that we sort of went over the Epstein space again, and we were discussing this particular lady, Juliet Bryant, who you can check out on X. And she is telling the story of how she was hooked up and ended up on Epstein Island. And she was a South African model, and over on this particular tour, which all the documents prove, and there are photographs and all the Epstein files show this, the ones that we can get our hands on, that Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, and Jeffrey Epstein visited South Africa, and Juliet Bryant was a young model at the time, and she was told that she could be introduced to the man, the right-hand man of Victoria's Secret, Jeffrey Epstein. And so, and then she was told that Bill Clinton was in the room and that would be very good for her career prospects if she would, you know, want to, you know, meet up or whatever. So she provided her modelling portfolio, to which Epstein looked up and down and said, yeah, you'll be good. We'll bring you back. She said, I don't have any money. And they said, don't worry, you won't need any. We'll just take it out of your modelling fees so you'll be able to survive. Of course, she realised that upon arrival from New York to New York and whisked away to the island very quickly that there wasn't going to be any work. And of course, the rest was downhill. Now, when you just take pause for a moment to think that Bill Clinton was travelling with Epstein, Kevin Spacey, and Chris Tucker to South Africa to look for models in this particular scenario that were going to be brought back, and Juliet Bryant's testimony, certainly in interviews, is beyond anything that even those that have been studying could even imagine. She's talking about breeding programs.
Oh, God. I heard that. I heard he wanted to spread his seed far and wide, Epstein, because he thought he was such an amazing guy.
Correct. So this is part of it. And look, it got into cloning. It got into extraterrestrials. Now, I have talked for some time about the what is called the Lifeboat Foundation. And you can look it up by Googling it and you'll see a black-paged website with a lot of information. Those that want to check that out will look for the mission statement. Now, what you won't see on there anymore is that Jeffrey Epstein was a member of two organisations on this particular Lifeboat Foundation. Now, it does exist. It has got literally hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people in these various different categories that work in there and or work with that, and they're MBAs and PhDs and MAs, etc. And, you know, it's all about credentials. And Epstein was on two of these particular boards, but also it publishes Epstein. Look, so you can now see this on the Wayback Machine. So if you can Google, you'll find it, because he was high up in this particular Lifeboat Foundation. But the thing was, the Lifeboat Foundation was talking about nanotechnology, vaccines, and if it all went wrong, colonization off planet. So so
God.
it's all there in black and white. So Epstein was part of this whole plan, which therefore the only way you can achieve stuff like that is with links with spy agencies that've got the secret black money, because you can't do this without money. But what they do, and the reason how we know that spy agencies work, is that they have this, these black money businesses. We know about drug running. We know about, the movie American Made is a perfect example to see how it works and the connections they have, etc. So when the government is meant to be the good guys, but they have a spy agency that's literally the bad guys, and the bad guys actually do business with the real bad guys, then the government's a mafia. This is what it is. So there's no other way around what we're saying. So how does that therefore explain that if you're a politician and you've been rubbing shoulders with people on both sides of the fence, you are going to be one of these bad guys, and you will turn up in a restaurant and you will behave the way that this clown Swalwell behaves. Now, he, of course, is out there belting Trump like you wouldn't believe, like everyone is at the moment. But therefore, it tells you exactly how the sides are set out. So once again,
Well, they always blame these people, wrongdoers like this, right? They always say other people are guilty of what they're guilty of, right? So that's why they accuse, they're looking for sex slurs about Trump and also about RFK. I honestly believe, I woke up this morning and I was thinking about how I know this sounds like a weird link up, but give me a sec. Like, the way manufacturing and all business has gone overseas, and essentially we've become this sort of logistics. Australia's like on the tit of China, right? The only thing being built is not new factories, it's massive warehousing, distribution centers, and the trucking companies are becoming huge, and they've got their little loading bays, and we're just consumers now. We're just a consumer society. So I think there is a chance, right, that domestic populations have been used as a business model because all of this manufacturing goes overseas, right? So most countries have seen that, and most of it goes to China. So their only hope for profit, right, in countries is logistics, deliveries of food, deliveries of overseas products. And Klaus Schwab said drones were going to deliver your DoorDash, your Uber Eats, all that kind of stuff. There's also the brain drain, right? People who are quite smart, wherever they were born, if they're interesting enough, they'll, get up and move overseas, move to New York. I moved from the UK to Australia. But often people with exceptional skills go elsewhere, right? So what's the only non-movable, non-losable, non-stealable by overseas traders business? Well, that's the business of illness and disability and all that healthcare stuff, right? Because they're consumers for life, even if that's sort of a shortened life. And who was sort of behind all this? Well, it was these organizations that we're told are not for profit, but clearly they've done this for profit, right? That's what they've done. All these not-for-profits have set up this business model where everyone's sick for profit. The whole thing is a lie. It's the 180 rule. That's what's going on here. I think they deliberately made people sick and disabled. That's why the figures you read out on this show are so horrific about even children, young people in Australia, the large percentage of them that are now disabled. They're not the people that are going to be lost overseas. They're the people who are going to be customers here domestically.
Indeed. It's amazing, isn't it, that you can create an industry from literally maiming people and expect a profit, and even worse, this is this total breach of trust, and then masquerade as if you're doing them a favor.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why I say it's the mafia. You couldn't. I mean, even the mafia has ethics compared to these people.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. Like when you watch movies like, The Godfather and Goodfellas, I mean, as nasty as they are, they still are a respect between them in certain circumstances. But again, when somebody's expendable, they're expendable. And this is the point. Now, the ultimate manipulation is that when you pretend that you're doing everyone a favor, and this has been seen over the weekend with these DOGE protests, etc., but we'll get into that in the news and some of the extra detail that's coming through. But I shared on the at the weekend many things on X, but one of them was, don't worry, we all trusted the government at one stage. And I think that's the point. I think there comes a time in your life where you stop trusting. Now, I've been thinking about it, watching some Billboard Chris videos that he's been posting from Australia over the last few days, and they're quite detailed. He records an entire conversation, only about 15 minutes, and he shares them with details. And I find that, like most people, when we're sort of scrolling through, we watch something. Sometimes we watch it for a few seconds, sometimes we watch it. But I find Chris's conversations that compelling that I watch them from start to finish each time, and I just want to see how things play out because it's a real study of human behaviour. Now, this is all to do with Chris's argument for many years now about giving young children puberty blockers is a bridge too far, in that these kids are having irreversible procedures and they're not at an age to be able to make these decisions for themselves, and there is an element of manipulation. Now, watching it, I realise that what I'm seeing now at the universities is a scenario where you go to high school, and if well, these days everyone seems to go to university, but typically 25% of the classroom will end up at university. Now, out of that, a percentage, let's say a third of them are the kids that are good at everything. They're good at school, they're good at sport, they're good looking, they've got the boyfriends, the girlfriends, they've got all the things going for them. And there's those people. Then there's the other people that aren't necessarily good at school, but they're the nerdy ones and they do well at school. And they finally get to go to university and they're amongst their own peers. They get to wear their own clothes, they get to colour their hair, they get to get their first tattoos, and they get into all this sort of stuff that they do as they're young adults, and they get to go to the uni bar and they get to drink alcohol and all of this, and you're adults. You're no longer children. Now you go to your first class, and the lecturer in the first week or two says to you, "Well, now you're adults, and two things are going to come up. One lecturer will say to you, 'You're responsible. I'm not going to tell you anything. If you don't do it, it's on you.' And the other one says, 'You're the new leaders of society. You're the people that are going to take over from the current people.'" So then they go, "Okay, so that means you're going to be the next prime minister. You're going to be the next head of public service. You're going to be the next attorney general. You're going to be the next high-powered CEO, etc., etc." And so these people get these delusions of grandeur 5 minutes after arriving at first year of university without even putting their first paper in yet. And they get this feeling of high importance. So what they therefore,
Superiority. Yeah.
correct, but what they now believe is that they are going to be accepted by the system and they're going to be the next leaders of the country. Some of them never, most of them never get there. Some of them won't and will infiltrate because they'll have that element of that's where they come from. But most will have this feeling of entitlement. So therefore, these people, many of whom have always been misfits and are now finding their way in society, cling to the establishment, believing that the establishment, which is the way it always has been, the status quo, the power and everything else, are now actively recruiting misfits. And
But it feels like the establishment handed them power. That's why.
Correct. And so it is that there's this great oxymoron that the misfits in society are now the accepted. This is this wonderful, strange play of how people are being manipulated. And when I say misfits, this is what Chris is arguing, is that this whole idea you can't be born in the wrong body type of thing. But the mass increase that's happened over a short period of time, that this whole thing, and a kid that's a tomboy is really just a boy in a girl's body type of thing, like it's a massive leap forward. Now, just to park that for 1 second, a family member of mine has told me now that two of her friends who went through this whole transitioning process over the last 5 years, somewhere from around 2016 to around about sort of 2023, and one went through the complete transition and a sex change, has since detransitioned, regretting entirely what went on. And another one who didn't go down the full hormone pathway, but went through the whole gender neutral change, all this they, them pronouns, all that stuff, has come back and said, "I realized it was just a phase. It was a complete error." Now,
Right.
so these are ultra left people that have realized. Now, this is just anecdotal evidence in my immediate circle, which blew my mind because that's 2 out of 2. So Chris is right because these people are all arguing, "Oh, it's minority and it's this and it's a tiny exception." So anything that goes against them is a tiny exception. But then park that for a moment. News.com.au over the weekend is telling us about this measles outbreak in Australia, this desperate measles outbreak. 10 cases. So hang on a second. You can't say that it's a minority. It's a negligible number. But then you can call the measles outbreak of 10 cases a negligible number. Last year, for goodness sake, there was 124,000 cases of measles in Europe. No one said a bloody word.
The whole thing with governments, they've become extremist. Everything is extreme,
Correct.
right? I was a tomboy growing up. I cut my hair short, and I did boys' things. I hung out with boys. We used to play a game called tracking. We'd all go out on our bikes into the forest, and I was the only girl, and it was all boys. And I wasn't interested in girl stuff at all. But it didn't mean that I wanted to be a boy. Of course, if I was alive now, I'm sure they'd plunk me on hormones and go, "That's it, you're a boy." And I'm glad that didn't happen because I had 3 kids and I breastfed them and all that kind of thing. I do think this is phases, but everything, like even this anti-vilification thing they've rammed through, which has to be reversed. It's just appalling because things are missing, like political opinion, all that kind of stuff. It's even I think it was Moira Deeming MP. Even she was saying, she's experienced a fair amount of her own hate, but even she doesn't agree with it because she's like, you're basically creating victimhood. But this whole it's become extreme socially, I think, so that we focus on this stuff because what they're doing is they're getting us hideously into debt. They're taking everything we've got. And I actually learned something very interesting over the weekend, which I'm going to research more. But I want you, Jason, and also the listeners to research this for me. And I've actually got some interviews on the podcast coming up this week after about a 2-week break. It is the notion, and this could be tied into union stuff that might occur in Australia. It is the notion, and if you go to Wikipedia, you can look this up. It's a real thing, of a debt strike. People become so overburdened, and it was so irresponsible of banking institutions and financial institutions to do this to people that a union or a class action is created. And in this collective, they go on a debt strike. They refuse to pay their debts. Now, if governments keep pushing us financially the way they are, I can see this being something that will happen in Australia, and I find it absolutely fascinating. And it's happened in America multiple times. And when a collective gets together legally and lawyers up and says, we're going on debt strike, what do? They negotiate and they lower the debt, Jason.
It's a very, very interesting turn of events, isn't it? Because I remember sort of 80s and 90s, there was a new movement of debt restructuring that was sort of emerging here in Australia. And the idea was that if you found that you were overwhelmed by debt, you could call up your bank or your credit card companies and you could get a kind of a restructure. And so what you would do is that rather than going bankrupt for, let's say $100,000 worth of consumer debt without any assets, you would be able to renegotiate that and they maybe give you an interest-free period.
But there's nowhere to renegotiate now because they're a mafia. No one's helping anyone out. They want you to stay heavily in debt.
Well, this is it. But it's the thing is, there's no benefit to the population if somebody goes bankrupt, because they become restricted, right? So this was this middle ground. But what's interesting is, just from an historical perspective, Alan Bond was one of Australia's richest businessmen. And Alan Bond purchased Channel 9 from Kerry Packer way back for about $1 billion, which was way, way over market. Now, Alan Bond eventually was going to be forced into bankruptcy. And Kerry Packer bought back Channel 9 from Alan Bond for something like $100 million. So imagine that. We bought it back with his own money and kept $900 million for himself. That's Alan Bond. Now, here's the thing. Rather than going broke and going bankrupt, Alan Bond had a notorious fellow called Jim Burns renegotiate the deal for him. And his creditors accepted something in the order of between 2 and I think it was not more than 5 cents in the dollar.
Oh, my God. That would be fabulous for Australians.
Correct. Now, Jim Burns, let's call him a colourful character at the very least.
Well,
right?
you've got to be to survive in this world.
Correct. So Alan Bond never technically went broke. Now, Alan Bond served time, but this was for some other scenarios, right? This is extraordinary that this was the case. However, he never went broke over this particular deal. So this is the point. So if you're able to renegotiate your debts, you don't have to serve. Now, bankruptcy, again, is not something to be feared like as a failure. Australia. In the United
Well,
States,
you can't make it, to reassure the listeners, you cannot, you can only go bankrupt by you have to agree to it, right? It has to be an agreement. I agree to go bankrupt. No one can make you bankrupt. They can't go to court and you're not there and make you bankrupt. You have to agree to it. That's the rule.
and in the United States, it's not seen as a character flaw, but as a badge of honor to be a business person to go bankrupt, but to get back off your feet, start again, and
I know four
rebuild.
businessmen in Melbourne who've gone bankrupt multiple times and they're huge builders and they just keep going. They don't care.
Now, here's the other point of it, right? Once somebody goes bankrupt, they're still allowed to earn an income. Now, it doesn't mean you can earn, like, for example, you can earn, let's say, I don't know, the average wage of $75,000 a year, maybe more, maybe less. But it also means that you're allowed to keep what you earn. In other words, you're allowed to save that money. Now, all of this goes before you're compelled to pay back the money that you went bankrupt. So in other words, let's say you go bankrupt, but then you get a job some miraculously for $300,000 a year. What that would mean is that you would then have to pay a component of that extraordinary income back
I
towards
think
your debts.
In Australia, it's if you earn over 150, 160,000 a year and you've gone bankrupt, they take past that. You're allowed to get up quite high. I mean, that's quite a high income. And then after that, you must start paying off the administrators on that bankruptcy.
So there you go. But the thing is, it's not forever. And the other interesting thing is a bankruptcy normally rules you out for 7 years, but you can also get an early discharge. So there are people who go through bankruptcy and are back on their feet in 3 years. What you can't do is borrow money during that period of time. And what you have to do is declare that you were once bankrupt. However, it doesn't mean that you are excluded. You may have to pay a premium on your interest rates in the future. There may be other reasons.
Well, you can claim it's discrimination. Why isn't that on the list? You could say, oh, they wouldn't give me a loan because I was once bankrupt, and you could threaten them with discrimination action, and by golly, you'll get your loan, I can tell you.
So there are many ways that you can work through it, but the thing is that those that I've spoken to who have gone through bankruptcy said the most interesting thing is that all that fear and all that debt collectors and the people knocking on the door and the phone ringing all the time, all that immediately goes away and you can live again. And they said the fear of bankruptcy was worse than the act. Now, I'm not encouraging people to that they go out today and get into hock and then go bankrupt. No, not that at all. What I'm saying is that perspective is a very important and powerful thing in this whole relationship of what's going on. And what I want to say to people, and this is the point, that if you're finding that your mental health, and this is speaking as a counselor, if you're finding that your mental health is being affected by things like debt, I just want you to know that there are actual professionals out there to be able to provide you with the perspective. Now, counseling is very simple. There's two parts to it. It's a professional person that explains to you and examines what you're doing as part of a process, as opposed to psychology, which is the same process of talking, but it's when you have an emotional bruise by comparison. So in other words, if your processes aren't working, the counselor's role is to examine your scenario and provide you with different forms of solution, one of which may be other professionals to help you through, or alternatively, self-development, self-improvement. That's the process of what it is. So again, if you find you're in a position that you're overwhelmed, that you feel like you're going underwater, you just need to find someone, and that process itself is the work that you need to find the right person. But there is always a way out, and there is always a strategy, and you can bet your bottom dollar that there are people that are far more powerful, far more wealthy, far more, you think, superior than you in one way or another, who've gone through all this stuff 100 times before. And much, much worse. There is nothing that you can't overcome, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, this is what annoys me about politicians. They've never had to run a business or answer to shareholders or employees, pay wages or any of that stuff. They've never had to face any of that because they've been career politicians and money's just been going into their bank account left, right, and centre. That is why they are not qualified remotely to govern people on these financial issues. And you know what? The state of Australia right now proves it.
Yeah, well said. Now, this episode 66 has kind of been a little bit of a Tarantino episode. We've kind of done the ending first. So as we're halfway through the show.
It's Beaver Day, by the way. Happy Beaver Day.
What's Beaver Day?
I don't know. It's all over the internet. Apparently, it's a happy beaver day. Sounds a bit rude.
Oh, fair enough. I'll have to do some research on that. Well, what I was going to say was halfway through the show, we probably should get into the news headlines. There's plenty to talk about within that and for the rest of the show.
Yes.
All right. So, a Liberal Party candidate who served in the Australian Defence Force has been disendorsed for making the below comments. Ben Britton told Joel Jamal that though he had served alongside tremendous women in the ADF, if we were to fix our Defence Force, unfortunately, they're going to need to remove females from Combat Corps. About 20% of Australia's military personnel are women. He said their hips are being destroyed because they can't cope with the carrying of the heavy loads and the heavy impacts that's required from doing combat-related jobs, he said in a podcast interview with Jamal last July. He said, I knew some of the toughest men I've ever met in my life. Absolute nails. War left them a shaking mess. Drug addicted can't go outside the house because they have panic attacks. If war can do that to them and destroy them, why would you want to send your beautiful women, your females, the ones that are the backbone of your society? Your society only exists because of women. Why would you want to sacrifice them in war on the altar? He's since been replaced by Nathaniel Smith. Labor is at odds of $1.17 to retain the seat ahead of the Liberals at $4.25. Britton ran for the United Australia Party in 2022, and Smith is currently the CEO of the Master Plumbers Association of New South Wales and was the former New South Wales State Liberal MP for Wallandilly from 2019 to 2023. The current member for Whitlam is Stephen Jones, who is the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services, who will retire at the election. The Aussie dollar is scraping US 60 cents amidst the downfall and panic over the tariffs imposed last week by Donald Trump. A lower dollar makes our exports cheaper and more competitive. The stock market is expected to fall today as the markets reopen. Major banks are starting to factor in 3 separate interest rate cuts before Christmas, which will bring the cash rate down to 3.35%. The price of gold in Aussie dollars has reached another record at over $5,087 an ounce.
Oh.
In a video report I made at the weekend and available on X, YouTube, Facebook and Substack, I explain what the tariffs mean and the effects they have had in defeating globalism. And news just in, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says trillions of dollars of factories are going to be built in America. He added the tariffs will not be delayed. The tariffs are here to stay. Meanwhile, Vietnamese leader To Lam has said he is willing to reduce his country's tariffs on the US to 0 if the US will match him. Currently, his country puts a 62% tariff on all goods coming into Vietnam from the United States. Also breaking news, Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett just announced that over 50 countries have already reached out to begin negotiations following President Trump's new tariff policies. And in related news, both Labor and Liberal leaders have committed to buying back the lease of Darwin Port from Chinese firm Landbridge in a massive strike against Chinese infiltration. In further related news, Murdoch Press published an article at the weekend reporting on how Chinese students are arguing that they have a sovereign interest in Australia. Could this be the reason why Dutton led the charge, followed by Albanese to move on to send Landbridge packing? Peter Dutton has walked back his plans to force public servants back into the office from their cosy work-from-home schemes adopted since COVID. This is how the deep state works, by governments pandering to the public service, who in turn do the legwork, albeit inefficiently for the government. Dutton also walked back his pledge to make redundant the 41,000 new government public servants that were added since Albanese took office by pledging to add no new staff, no new redundancies, instead a hiring freeze and wait for natural attrition. You can always count on self-interest in politics, said Paul Keating, because you know it's trying. Meanwhile, another disendorsed Liberal MP, Russell Broadbent, who is at odds of $4.70 to retain his seat of Monash in Victoria, says politicians must be willing to lose their seats in order to do what's right. In the US, massive protests have been coordinated to protest those who wish to be governed harder by the left and for fraud to continue unbridled. The anti-DOGE protests in New York were large, whilst in other states like Ohio, people were seen being bussed in and pre-made signs were handed out. Others reported now deleted ads offering $200 a person to attend as a protester. Protesters then left all at once, just like a shift change. Thousands of protesters strangely dressed in Palestinian-style kaffir scarves and flags, along with COVID-era surgical masks, are seen arriving at several states around the country in videos presented by journalist Laura Loomer. AstroTurfing, a lucrative industry of propaganda, those seen to be protesting to maintain government fraud and largesse, is seen as 30% of people who will never wake up. Elon Musk has a message for anyone planning to defund DOGE. Defunding DOGE will have no effect as the team is widely distributed within the government, and unlike Democrat NGO scams, it needs zero taxpayer funding. The US State Department has announced it is freezing all existing and new visas for South Sudanese seeking to enter the US, citing the transitional government's refusal to accept its own nationals being deported from the states. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced the new visa and travel restrictions on Saturday, while accusing the East African nation's leadership of taking advantage of the United States. Medically assisted dying, also known as voluntary euthanasia, accounted for nearly 5% of all deaths in Canada in 2023, new government data shows. The country's fifth annual report since euthanasia was legalised in 2016 showed around 15,000 people underwent assisted dying that year after being successful in their applications. By comparison, the leading cause of death in Canada was heart disease at 17% of all deaths. Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, has argued the big winners are countries that have shrinking populations, basically because it raises robotics and AI. He mentions xenophobic immigration policies as those who will pay the price. In other words, he's pretending that open borders is better than closed borders because natural population growth in those countries is unachievable, but then those countries will be turned into Westworld earlier. And the Senate has confirmed that Dr. Oz is to head the Medicare and Medicaid organisation in a party line vote. Democrats opposed Oz over questions regarding cuts to Medicaid, while Republicans praised his intention to reform the program. Nicola.
I would like to add a personal story and discovery, which is relevant to us all. So during the pandemic and when I realized how things were going rapidly downhill with regard to our personal privacy in banking, with regard to banking and finances, and I left ANZ and Westpac. I left ANZ because of their smart ATMs, facial recognition, and also they went cashless, and I removed 10 accounts from the ANZ, including my children's trust accounts, savings, everything. And they didn't seem to give a stuff about losing me as a customer. They asked me why, and I told them, and they just didn't care. So these banking institutions do not care about us anymore. That's obvious. And so I toddled off and I went to Bendigo Bank, and I've been very happy with Bendigo Bank. And I did a very silly thing. I began relying on their app. And their app was very convenient, and I used the word was. And then I got a message. I logged into my Bendigo Bank app on Friday, I think, and I got this message, and you may also have received this message and not entirely know what it means. It says, keeping you secure. To help keep your money safe and protect you from fraud, our app collects information about your use of e-banking. That's fine. They can know about my use of e-banking all they want. It then goes on to say, this includes information about your device's settings and other installed applications. That means all your other apps. That means your social media. This can help us detect suspicious activity on your account. Then it's highlighted by continuing to use the Bendigo Bank app. You consent to us doing this. And if you do not consent, you must close and stop using the app. That's a threat. Underneath is a big bar that says, I agree. I have not agreed. Therefore, I do not have access to my own bank via the app. I can go on a laptop and I can go into the bank, which is very difficult when you work, but I may not have the convenience of my banking app unless I give them, and BlackRock has recently bought shares in Bendigo Bank, unless I give them access to all my other apps. Now, my concern, and I've spoken to them on the phone, is once you give a banking app and a bank access to all the other apps on your phone, we are rapidly sliding into the social credit score system of, I'm sorry, you can't access your bank account today because you posted something on X that goes against our community standards. So this is why I won't click I agree, and I'm going to have to really dramatically alter my life and how I deal with my money, my income, because I refuse, Jason, to give a bank access to all my private activity on the phone. And here's why. I bought my phone, I pay my phone bill, and what I do on the phone that I pay for is private. And these banks have no right to ask for access to it, Jason. We don't get access to their private activity.
Yeah, it's a very good point, isn't it? It's incredibly, it's distressing, isn't it, when you feel like that something that you are compelled to be a part of can just presume that it can take over the control of your life. This is why I think it's very interesting that there is a push within certain freedom parties, particularly the Citizens Party, led by, oh goodness me. Anyway, I'll get back to.
It'll come to you.
Yeah, of course it does, because
It's
it's
too
early at the recording here at 6 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is. But by the way, the sun is up with the end of daylight saving, so
Fabulous.
that's a bonus.
Oh,
But
I
also
feel better, yeah.
with Jared Rennick, who's also supporting the Citizens Party, in the work that they're doing to try and build a citizens bank through the post office system,
Yeah.
which is really interesting.
I'll be there. I'll take all my business there, and I'm working my butt off. You'll have a good customer.
Yeah, so this is my point, and I find this absolutely fascinating that there's so much great work that's being done to do this, and I think that we need renewal in our institutions, and certainly in the banking institutions.
Look, we need to regain our privacy, Jason. Not regain it, but not give it away, right? Because once you've click agree, it's open season. It's open slather on you, right? And these people do not have a right to know what we do privately on our devices. They are going to categorize people. They are going to put us into brackets. Yes, they're going to put us into earnings brackets. They've already done that. But spending brackets, where do you spend your money? What are your habits? What other apps do you use? This is none of their business. Now, the thing about privacy and freedom is it can't really be stolen. It can only be given away. And we saw that during the pandemic. And there's a whole bunch of us that refuse to do this. So, they stole our freedoms. They mandated our, house arrest essentially during the pandemic. This financial stuff is going to come at us harder and faster than it ever has before. It was just one line in there that said, access to other applications. Now, they use the word applications so that you don't associate it with apps, which is what we know applications to be abbreviated. They use the long form applications. This is a clever ruse so you don't realize what you're clicking. And when you click agree, that's it. All bets are off. They know everything about you. Why would your bank want to know everything about you, Jason?
Well, it isn't. I mean, every through your Flybys card for those that still keep that stuff.
No, never do store cars, Jason. No, never.
I agree with you. The name that I forgot, and I can't believe I did, and apologies to him, Robbie Barwick from the Citizens Party. Robbie is just one of these ultra talented individuals who followed the Senate banking inquiry to every hearing around the country. Interviewed him a couple of times, and he's led the charge for this particular work on creating a citizens bank. Robbie will be running in the Senate in Victoria in the upcoming election. And I'll make this point again that even though there's the Australia First Alliance, it's one of these things now that you realise that these people need to eventually come together and run under one ticket. But you can't have everyone running as these lead.
Well, they are, because in Victoria, Dr. Chris Neal is running as number one for Gerard Rennick's People First Party, and my husband Nick is running second for Heart for Michael O'Neill, and then someone else is running third. So there are people, what these guys are doing is they're sacrificing. These are potential politicians, including my husband, who are not in it for themselves. They're not looking to be career politicians. They are looking to support what would be the best outcome for the state and for the country. And so what people listening to this show, and they need to spread the word, because obviously, we don't have millions listening to the show. show, and we need it. So please share if you can. People need to understand there's a difference between these politicians who are out for themselves and politicians who are willing to back each other and take a hit to get someone else elected because, the alliance has decided that's probably the best way forward in that state. And it's interesting to see. It's a beautiful thing. It's like teamwork, right? We're on a team. We're on Team Freedom. And you've got to support these guys that are part of this alliance, is what I'm trying to say, because they're not in it for themselves. And it's really important. We've got to get rid of these people that are in it for themselves, Jason. They're career politicians. I mean, look at One Nation. She's even put her own child up, right, in Tasmania. And I'm not saying she's not up to the task, but there are so many people that One Nation could have chosen. You're telling me there's no one in Tasmania that could have represented Tasmanians? Does Pauline Hanson's daughter even live in Tasmania? I thought they were a Queensland family.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? There's something that's very odd about dynasties in politics.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is something that many people are against. And look, royalty is about dynasty, right? That's how it works. It's hereditary. Now, the Catholic Church, by comparison, and correct me if I'm wrong, went down the other path. This is part of the reason why priests don't marry, is so that you can't have hereditary passing down of power. It's the opposite. So this is on its own is different. Whereas politics doesn't have those rules set. But if somebody like Pauline Hanson, probably 3 years out from retirement potentially, or she might go until she drops, introduces her daughter to run in another state. Now, this is a very interesting play, because if Pauline was ever to retire and her daughter Lee Hanson gets elected, well, it's presumed that Lee Hanson would somehow rise in the ranks and compete against James Ashby, who many are saying has got his eyes on the prize.
She wants her to run the party, the money side.
So whichever way that forms, but this is again a dynasty. Now, Pauline, technically, in terms of percentage points, owns the third party movement on the right side of politics here in Australia. But that won't always be forever. The Australian Democrats were the third party for a long period of time before they literally capitulated and disintegrated and never to be heard of again. The Greens have built quite successfully compared to One Nation since that Bob Brown and Pauline were elected in 1996 around the same time. And the Greens have 12 senators, and Pauline has herself and Malcolm Roberts by comparison. So the Greens, the left, have certainly far outperformed the right in that situation. So the restructuring is important. There is a massive element that is missing on third-party politics in Australia. It's something we'll talk about at a later stage, because there is some very interesting ideas that are being put together that will be able to consolidate in ways that nobody expected, which will be quite impressive. But the important thing is that revolution is also a game of inches until it's not, because there is nothing quite like an idea whose time has come, and that's when the revolution turns on its head. It's what we saw in 2016 with Trump. It's what we saw again in 2024. But at the same time, we're now in a situation in the US that we are watching. Technically, it could be artificial, but it is a civil war of sorts. And we have seen a genuine split in the species between those that want to be self-sufficient and those that demand to be dependent upon the government. And there is the left wing of politics is determined to feed that beast in a situation that has led now to a scenario where in Canada, nearly 5% of deaths in Canada in 2023 were by assisted dying, or as some say, assisted suicide.
Oh,
It's
God.
extraordinary. Now, they have delayed since February of 2024. You can't apply for assisted dying if you simply have a mental health disease, although there have been people who've taken themselves out for depression, which I just find extraordinarily poor. There should have been an uproar in the psychiatry organisations and psychologists that anyone could allow somebody to take an assisted dying scenario for depression. That would mean that entire industry has failed.
Well,
Because
their whole system is hypocritical, right? Because during the pandemic, when it came to these injections, they said, "Oh, Dan Andrews constantly said," which made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, "Oh, certain groups have to get priority, the mentally unwell, the depressed, the disabled, the obese." They love putting people into certain groups, and it was basically saying, "Oh, we care about these more. They've got to be protected," right? Well, these are the same certain groups that you're saying, yeah, if it gets too much for you being disabled or depressed, you can have assisted dying. Make up your mind. Are you trying to help these people and save their lives, or are you trying to shuffle them off the mortal coil? Because that's what is going on here. It makes me very angry, and they don't give people options. Now, anyone who's ever been depressed, and we all have, bereavement can make you depressed. Breakdown of a relationship can make you depressed. The loss of a child can make you depressed. The loss of a job or a home can make you depressed. And by God, everyone's gone through that during the pandemic. So are you seriously telling me that the same people who wanted to inject these certain groups are now offering them best options for end-of-life care? In 100 years, I hope humanity is still here in 100 years, because if they look back on this time in history, it's going to make the Second World War look like a tea party. What's gone on here? It already does. Over 30 million people are dead from these injections. That's what's going on. And what, it's not enough? The death by injection? It's literally death by lethal injection. That's what they've done to people. You're telling me now we're going to assist them in making their own decision. And if you've ever heard from any of the people who've witnessed these deaths in these gas chambers and the other methods that they've used, these deaths are not quick, and they are not painless, and they are not what the people expected to go through. Assisted dying means, oh, you'll help me do it pain-free. It's not pain-free. Some people in those gas chambers took 6 to 7 hours to die, gasping for oxygen. And there's no button to change your mind, Jason. This is evil, what's going on.
For the government of Canada to go down this pathway to promote assisted dying, for mine, only proves that the COVID agenda, or as we were told, was bullshit.
Yep.
It's just another piece of evidence for you can't possibly say save Nana, but it will help you die at the same time. Now, the average age of assisted dying is sort of, I think, a little bit over 75, but at the same time, there are many people that are much younger. They claim that it's for people suffering from cancers and disabilities, etc. But what they're saying to people in hospitals is, you're going to die anyway, why don't you take the assisted dying? That's some of the anecdotal evidence that's coming out.
Hang on, Canada was the country. There was a woman who was disabled. I'm not sure whether it's from combat or from the injections. She was in a wheelchair. She applied for a grant to the Canadian government for 100,000 Canadian dollars for a ramp to be able to fit into the front of her home, so she didn't have to move into sort of disability accommodation. She wanted to stay in a home that was paid off, that she owned, but she couldn't afford the ramp. And instead of giving her the money for the ramp, they offered her assisted dying. That's when all this news broke, because she then went to the press.
Yeah, that is just devastating. To think that a public servant could actually justify that at the same time, the same public servant that's demanding that someone else takes a vaccine so that they can feel safe in the office, despite the fact that they've taken said vaccine. I'll make some more comments about depression. Depression, for most people, results in a form of inertia. Like, you just become, like, I remember Gary McDonald, Norman Gunston, the character that he played, used to say that when he suffered severe depression, he would lie in the fetal position in bed and couldn't move. He was literally catatonic, inertia, hopelessness, that feeling. Now, the opposite of depression is not happiness. The opposite of depression is vitality. And that's a very interesting and clear distinction. Hopelessness leads to inertia, because you just can't move. You can't make a move. This is why people say that when they're depressed, if they exercise, they feel better.
Yeah.
Now, this is not to say that exercise is a form of vitality.
Well, it's the best. It's the best natural endorphins in your brain to help you through it. It's much better than the pharmaceutical option, in my humble opinion.
And the point is that at the very least, you would use that in conjunction with anything else, because it's a version of constructed vitality. The very fact that you move from inertia to movement and exercise can only be good because it pumps the blood and gets your heart moving, and all of a sudden you're doing something, and it's positive. You come home, you might feel energized, you might feel hungry, you might feel like, oh yeah, I can now go and do the cleaning up, or wash the car, or mow the grass, or do something. Go to the shops, go and spend some money and get something to eat at your favorite restaurant. Like, it's a game of inches, isn't it? Defeating the black dog.
My teenage daughter and I talk about this all the time, right? Because we're fascinated. Well, she's fascinated by the subject of, are we a body with a brain or a brain with a body? We came to the conclusion that we were a brain with a body. But there's this thing, when I was acting, there's tricks you can use with the body, right? So if you are doing a scene, this sounds unrelated, but it is related. If you're doing a scene and it's quite emotional and long, and there's a part of the scene where you're meant to be upset and crying, and I always found that easy because I would, in my mind, use my brain to refer back to sad things that had happened in my life, and it assisted me. I didn't do the fake thing of blowing sort of lemon into the eyeballs to make you cry. I was an emotional natural actor. But then if there's part of the scenes where you're not to cry, where you're to recover and be strong, but you're struggling, what you do is you dig your fingernails into the palm of your hand. And apparently newsreaders use this when they get very upsetting stories to report on as well, although these days they seem to thrive on them. You dig your fingernails into your hand because when your mind is experiencing an emotion, if you do something physically to your body, it redirects all its energy, because this brain that has a body needs to preserve the body so that the brain is safe, right? You can redirect with something physical, and that's why exercise is so good. It's also unfortunately why people go into awful spirals of self-harming and stuff like that. That's not the way. That doesn't fix anything, but exercise does. And I've actually run my way out of depression many times. I ran and exercised my way through a domestic violence situation, for instance, a very, very bad one, where I actually thought at one point I wasn't going to make it, that this person was going to be the end of me, literally. And any woman, and many women I know have experienced domestic violence. I used exercise to be able to cope with that. And the exercise saved me. And I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to get up early and go running before work and all that kind of thing. But eventually it became addictive, and it's the chemicals it releases in the brain, the feel good, the dopamine, the hormones. It helps you through it because it's a self-healing measure. And it's also something for you, and it's something for you to attach to distract. And I know there's some things that can't be distracted from, but you have to use your body to get through your brain harm, if you know what I mean, if that makes sense, Jason.
That's a very, very clever analysis and deep thinking, and I love that, because each of us, through the process of meditation, when we discover that process, understand, for many who, especially kids that just live in the moment, I mean, playing video games, hanging out with their friends, etc. And when you take a child out of a scenario where they're not, you say, okay, enough, you got to turn the video game off, you got to come inside, whatever it is, the child is distracted and can be quite sort of, uncomfortable, aggressive, whatever it is.
Oppositional defiance, I think, is the official term, Jason.
So there you go. But the point is that they're not allowed to do what they're doing. And so they've been removed from living in the moment, and now they're living in a new moment. That's why kids get bored so quickly. But as an adult, when you understand the process of self-reflection, to be able to sit and then consider the idea of meditation, which in simple terms is to sit still and imagine looking back on yourself and observing yourself in a scenario, that is actual self-reflection in the moment. So meditation is self-reflecting in the moment. But then the ability to then consider your life in the past, which many people do, and of course this is why sport is such an interesting process of both the whole beautiful thing about sport is competing in the moment, but practicing sport is the process of self-reflection in the moment. As a cricketer, you practice playing the same shot over and over and over again. A footballer, passing the ball, tackling, kicking, placing the ball, all of these things that you do in sport. So you are self-reflecting to get better at it. It's like a boxer that might throw 10,000 punches you might throw 10 in a round, for example, but you got to throw 10,000 in the ring doing that. This is the thing. So self-reflection in anything is so important, but self-reflection, that ability, the beautiful part of meditation, to literally look at yourself from above, imaginarily, and realizing that the moves that you make is just extraordinary. So the same thing, it's a separation of body and brain. It's the same process.
It's a clever thing, the body. It can really help you. Now, I do just want to comment on this Larry Fink thing, which I think he said a while ago now. What an absolute a-hole this guy is. Shrinking populations, countries with shrinking populations are going to be winners. Now, don't forget, Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock, now the most powerful hedge fund on planet Earth, right? So if he took a business model to governments, and governments obviously love him because the ACCC, the monopolist commissions in all our countries, have not stopped BlackRock having a monopoly, which I think is outrageous. They should not have shares in every single supermarket in Australia. Who the hell allowed that? You guys are asleep at the wheel. You should be ashamed of yourselves. But if he went to governments and said, oh, shrinking populations are going to be the winners and this, that, and the other, they would have sat up and listened. And it's really, really sad. And when you've got that in conjunction with this story about there are certain, very hard communist groups in China saying that they feel entitled to have a right and, to come here and run Australia, it's really quite worrying what's going on. I know we don't have heaps of time left. We are at the end of the show now, but maybe we can talk about those things a bit more tomorrow, Jason, because they're very concerning. And the thing is, the mainstream media in Australia are reporting this like, oh, isn't it terrible? The communists are coming to Australia. But I think it's this thing of normalization. I think they're putting it out there because, it is happening, and it is something that is a possible future for us, and they want us to sort of get on board with it. So I think it's really sad. What would you like to say before we go, Jason?
Well, just quickly on that point, what we'll do tomorrow is that we'll play the Larry Fink clip. It's about 1:40. It's definitely worth listening to. And my thoughts on it are that there are two schools of thought as to why he's doing that. And it's one of these situations where you have Larry Fink infiltrating governments and giving them
Totally.
two worst case scenarios, and this is why they behave the way that they do. There's a lot more detail in that discussion, and I think we'll probably spend a good 10 minutes on it tomorrow. But in the meantime, heading into a brand new week, we're going to see the stock market slump today, but at the same time, the dollar has fallen, exports are cheaper, and interest rates are coming down. And all of this is going to lead to a brand new scenario with a complete restructure of how the economics works. Last point, Australia does tariff the United States 10%, regardless of what you think. It's called the GST. And so we already charge that. So interestingly, for those people who are wondering what's going on, they've put 10% back on us. And at the end of the day, our dollar's already fallen 5%. So there's no net difference in what we're doing anyway. I find that extraordinary in what we're seeing, around the world, the overall panic. But this is just another scenario where the whole world thinks that they're right and Trump's wrong, and Trump gets proven right every time. I love the fact that what we're seeing is the great big change. The video that I put out on it, which is the headline, is to do with Dutton and Albanese wanting to return the Darwin port. I go into all the detail about the TPP. Andrew Robb, who was the architect of the signing of the TPP and retired 6 days later from politics, he was the one that put together the land bridge deal with Darwin Port. I explained it in relations to the tariffs. It's a 20-minute video. I think it's probably one of the best, if not the best, reports I've ever put together. Very proud of it, and I encourage people to check it out.
Yeah, and as I said to you privately yesterday, Jason, I get a sneaking suspicion that not all of our politicians, even the ones we shit can, for want of a better word, on a daily basis for appearing to do the wrong thing. And I can see in their faces and their eyes that they don't believe what they're saying. I don't think they are all bad people. I think they are the deliverers of the bad news of something that's going on behind the scenes. And the reason I say that is, in a sense, I do think there are people out there who work within this system who quietly champion what we're doing. Not just us, but other people. Not everyone. They certainly don't like people that they consider true sort of rabble-rousers, conspiracy theorists, and go off half-cocked. And I think it was one freedom fighter who found out this week that from a freedom of information request, I think it was Cafe Locked-Out, found out that they were censored by a third party, but the third party wasn't named. I think that's probably the case for all of us, because as you say, our radio show doesn't get out there. But I think it's important to remember that though these people are in these positions, and sure, predominantly they're doing the wrong thing, there's a reason for it. And it's that reason for it that I want to get to. I hope we get to it in my lifetime, because I'm desperate to know, because it's so cruel what's happening And someone needs to be here protecting the people. These are innocent people with families, with children. You know, I work with 2 people who've got small babies. They don't deserve this. So we need to keep pushing to get better people inside these institutions, inside these parliaments and congresses and senates. And we are trying to do that. So I hope you support them all. Thank you for listening again to the Daily Australian on our Monday edition. To myself, Nicola Charles, and my co-host and co-producer, Jason Olbourne. We'll do this all over again tomorrow.